Hello, everybody, and welcome back to Writing the Rapids, the show where I, Joe Bielecki, talk to writers about writing. Very often, those writers have been recommended to me by writers who have previously been on the show, except in this month's case, Rick Claypool is just a writer whose work I really enjoy, so he's on the show. They're my rules, and I can break them if I want to. Rick Claypool is the author of The Mold Farmer from Six Gallery Press and Leech Girl Lives Spaceboy Books. His short fiction appears here and there online, including in Bear Creek Press, Expat Press, and Heavy Feather Review. He grew up in the industrial outskirts of Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. Now he lives near Providence, Rhode Island, where he spends as much time as possible wandering through the woods looking for fungi and slime molds. He also has a new book out now called Tentacle Head, out through Bear Creek Press. All relevant links will be in the show notes. Be sure to stick around to the very end of the conversation where Rick does a little reading from Tentacle Head as well. If you would like to help this show remain a thing, patreon.com/noisemakerjoe is the place to go for that. For recurring donations, you could also do paypal.me/noisemakerjoe for a one-time donation, or you could buy my book. It's called Tired, and you can find it on Amazon. Now, without further ado, let's get into my conversation with Rick Claypool. So Tentacle Head is the new book. It's out from Bear Creek Press. It's a nice little shorty. At some point, maybe we can get into the semantics of what makes a novel or a novelette or a novella, or any of the other words that people use. But it's a nice little shorty about some weird little mutant guys who are discarded by a laboratory and hijinks ensue. I think after writing the essay on Leech Girl Lives and The Mold Farmer that I did, it's hard for me not to see this one as a work of political allegory too, even though it's sillier and almost could be considered like somehow middle grade, like something you might read to a child for bed, which is just delightful to me. So, like, where did this book come from following the other two?
So, yeah, Tentacle Head. And thank you, just all the help for having me on and to talk about this, and for being interested and all that. It's I just call it. I mean, I just call it a book. In terms of like novella, novelette, whatever. It just is a book. But so this. Both my prior books had more of political origins. In here, I'm delving a little bit more into like psychology. Like, I don't know. I'm someone, like, part of why I'm writing is I'm writing for therapy, and it's essentially it's the sort of the origin story of one of the characters in the longer thing that I'm working on. So Tentacle Head is sort of this. He's kind of like a manifestation of depression.
Yeah.
And this context of this like totally horrible, weird world, well, the sort of moon place, and it's a little bit has its I kind of made it a point that I wanted to start over and do a world and characters in a situation that was as divorced from the sort of current socio-political goings on as possible, just for the sake of my own mental health and being going on a little bit of a dissociative fugue while I'm working on it, and it also, there's a lot of it, there's my deep down and in heart of hearts there's a place where I'm just like I don't know, I'm at my happy place is like thinking of like Saturday morning cartoons and things like that. And so that's also part of, I don't know, just what my brain is steeping in slash using to process trauma.
Sure. So when did you start writing this one then? Is this a pre or post pandemic creation?
This was a pre-pandemic creation. Oh, we just had some thunder.
Awesome.
this is I wrote it pre-pandemic, and I wasn't even sure what it was. It was a long short story, or and but yeah, it was mostly written before the pandemic. A lot of it like at a coffee shop in Pittsburgh, and it it's I'm curious if there are like pandemic-y things that come out about it, because I feel like there could be, or just like the overall feeling of like this is a shit world where everything is fucked up, and like is that like
I'm scrolling through the PDF now. There is a bit sort of in the, I don't know, the beginning of the third that felt kind of pandemic-y. That there was
I guess there is a plague. I guess
there is a plague, and it makes everybody want to stay away from each other and very angry.
Yes. Yeah, no, so I wrote that before the pandemic, but I can, that was just, it was the plague trope and how it, I guess, functions in fiction, and how and how turns out how an actual plague plays out. It's pretty.
Who would have thunk it? Yeah, it's weird. I at some point started rereading a false start book length novel thing that I had started writing maybe in like 2018, and there's a thing that happens in it that causes everybody to stay inside, and I sort of like zoom all the way out to like globally, simultaneously, everybody cares about this and is terrified, but also everybody's ignoring it too. And like certain things that I wrote down were like exactly like 1-to-1 what would happen in 2020. And it was just like, it's amazing that we could all see this coming, or, I'm not much of a Jung guy, but there's something like inside of our subconscious that like, even if you're not paying attention that hard to how the world works, like you just kind of knew what was coming, which is so wild because it seems so surprising. Everything that happened and is still happening seems so surprising. But apparently we all knew.
Right. When like that particular domino falls, and the way society, although I don't know, I feel like my experience of the pandemic, where there are ways where I almost, I don't know, I had more optimism for like how like I thought people might behave. I don't know why. I'm not necessarily an optimistic person, or by inclination, or like like a big hopey guy. But I really thought that I don't know. I found myself just really like heartbroken and disappointed, and just generally like how things played out, and how so many of the so much of the animosity and selfishness just sort of came to the forefront. And I'm still kind of getting a lot of twinges of that, right? Whenever it is different things happen that are just like, oh, like we could have done things in a way that kind of like looks out for folks who, um, are more vulnerable, than just more. Okay, now we have to make people who are more susceptible or vulnerable just be more isolated and work harder and try to, um, you know, the society soldiers on, right? And
Right. Yeah, there was a point too where I guess it's a disappointment for me because I feel like I'm in the same sort of headspace as you, where like I'm not super optimistic about the world and about especially like America as a civilization. Um, but like it seemed like it should have been so easy to get past it, right? 2 weeks to slow the spread or whatever was the mantra, and it just
Mhm.
kind of seemed like if we had all just done that, then it would have been fine. Like, I still kind of believe that, even though I'm sure it's more
Right.
complicated. And I understand that different businesses took it more seriously than others. And it's not just individuals, and not everybody, My wife and I had it pretty easy where we could work from home, and we're both pretty introverted anyway. And so it was like, this is great. Our dog is still a puppy. We're both at home. We don't have to leave. We're getting burgers every day for dinner. Like, this is pretty good. There's really nothing to complain about. And enough people had that experience that like being grumpy at those people became a meme. And just kind of all the all the stages that we've been through
Yeah.
is it's very strange. But and I mean it was like during the pandemic that I read your other two books too, which you know I feel like I'm pretty emotionally resilient at this point, so it wasn't like, oh man, I should be reading something happier. But it, especially the Mold Farmer, was like, oh yeah,
Back to work.
we need to unify a little bit better. We need to not be so out for ourselves, or at least we need to expand the definition we have for what constitutes ourself. I think the three books that you have out are all pretty different, I guess, but sort of the mushroominess is the aesthetic link that ties them all together. I'm curious about where your love of fungus comes from and how it's informed your work beyond just aesthetics.
Yeah, it's I have very distinct like memories of like fungal encounters, like when I was a kid or when I was in college, and like they were, I don't know, there were just there were just a couple of moments that just seeing just weird colorful growths in the woods. I had no idea what they were, and I grew up sort of in around sort of in the industrial outskirts of Pittsburgh, so I was around woods a lot, and had almost never really noticed mushrooms or fungi or anything like that, except for like this handful of times where there were just some things that were just like big and bright and drippy and almost sort of, you're just sort of demanding attention. It's just like, holy shit, what is that? And the and there's this and so I've just had this. So it starts out, so I didn't start like actually delving into like mycology or mushroom identification or anything like that until fairly recently, like even after I wrote the Mold Farmer. And so what it started as just this general idea of they're interesting, they're weird, they have this association with rot and decay, and if it's in your house, that's a sign of bad things, right? That are potentially toxic and problematic, and you don't want that happening. And which is it's I think it kind of, in retrospect, it's almost like a mycophobic attitude, right? That is sort of something that we all, not we all, but I think at least I think most people in this country sort of who are exposed to mushrooms, like wild mushrooms, when they're children, the basic lesson is don't touch that, it might be poisonous. Or it's let's don't breathe in those spores, or that's making the lawn look ugly, or that's a sign that the tree is dying, or whatever, right? They're sort of a thing that is wrong. It's a signifier of a wrongness, and of a sort of malevolent, and they're also almost always a surprise in this context. If we're like, if you don't study mushrooms or know how they work, and why most people don't. I mean, I never really paid much attention. They can appear just so abruptly, like overnight. It's not like the the plants and flowers, whatever, you can that are generally around us, right? You can see them grow. Suddenly that there is abruptly this rude looking slimy thing sticking out of the yard, and maybe it has weird colors, or maybe it has a weird smell to it, or maybe it's beautiful in its own way, but it's like, where did this come from? Who put it there? How does this work? And I don't know, I think that kind of uncertainty is really interesting and amazing. And I also think like there's just like a cool tradition of there's maybe tradition is too strong a word, but there's, I don't know, there are people have been writing cool fungal stories for a long time, right? There's I mean, Jeff Vandermeer, of course, is a huge force in weird fungal fiction, right? And his whole the ambergris books with the sort of mushroom people, and Finch in particular, right, are just such an interesting way to sort of explore the sort of uncanny aspect of kind of making fungus people beings. And I'm trying to think of other and then the book that I recommend to everyone is Aaliyah Whiteley's The Beauty, which is it's a short, it's a novella, and the prose is just, it's this kind of, it's both sparse and lyrical at the same time somehow, but it's I mean, the premise is a sort of there's a post-apocalypse where all the women of the world sort of die of an illness, and then so the sort of, there's this sort of sad encampment of men left behind, and there are these fungi women, or sort of fungi that sort of imitate the women enough that the men are like, okay, well, maybe we'll try to have a relationship with the fungi women, and it doesn't, we'll just say it's like in many sort of natural circumstances, right? Like when there's like a fungus animal interaction. The fungus has its own agenda that it's using the animal for, and it doesn't necessarily work out great for the animal.
Yeah. There was the whole iteration of the zombie
Mm.
lore for a while there too that was very fungusy. I think Resident Evil did some fungusy type zombies, and The Last of Us had the big sort of fruiting body heads and clicked to figure out where things were. Have you read what's it called? The Entangled Life by Merlin Sheldrake?
I haven't. Everyone keeps recommending it to me, and
Of course they
yeah.
would, because it seems very on brand.
So I feel like I need to catch up, because I'm very interested in the ideas I hear people talking about, of the sort of um, uh, sort of looking at it from the view of sort of the interrelatedness of, fungi and each other, and fungi and other species, talking about the sort of the mycorrhizal connection between fungi and trees and other plant life, which is essentially sort of forming this network. Because it's, I guess, it's when we people see, a mushroom or some other sort of fruit body of a in the woods, right? That's just that's a small part of the actual fungus, right? The real fungus, the most of the fungus are these sort of threads that are either under the ground or in the piece of wood, and they can they spread out and move about, and that's how that's just the actual mushroom that appears as the tip of the iceberg, right? And
Right.
so when and they've sort of found that these threads actually connect trees to each other, and that there's theories about how they can sort of take advantage of these sort of threads. There are exchanges of nutrients between the fungi and the trees, and there are also ways that the trees can sort of send messages to other trees about harms that might be coming and things like that. It's wild stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. It was wild for me to finally understand that looking at a mushroom and being like that's fungus is like looking at an apple and being like that's a tree.
Correct. Yeah.
Like, oh my god, yeah. And then some of the stuff about mycelium, and not just that, like, trees can talk to each other through fungus, but that like the information within the fungus moves in ways that we don't understand and at speeds that don't seem possible, is really interesting, even before you start to think about how you could use that model to make like computers very good or something. Yeah, one of the things that he says in his book pretty early on is that fungus are more like animals than they are like plants, which
Yeah.
is still something that's really hard for me to wrap my brain around. But is, I think, an interesting model for how we should start to look at ourselves. Which is sort of, I think I'd have to check Goodreads to see what the timeline is, but I'm pretty sure I was like reading The Mold Farmer and The Entangled Life either concurrently or very close to each other. Which is how in my essay I got very stoked or very hooked on this idea of like, this is what happens if a calamity happens before we form community. And yeah, I don't just like, I'm not a huge mycelium or mycology guy. Like, I think it's really cool, but I have a hard time reading, anything sciency that's beyond one of those mass market paperbacks that The Entangled Life is. Like, it's very beginner level, even though it has a very useful bibliography that I could go and really dig into if I wanted to. But I'm very much one of those guys who's a fan of science. I think it's really cool, and I love to see science happen, but, you know, kind of like football or something, like, I'm not getting out on the field. And just,
Right.
you guys do your thing, and when something cool happens, I will cheer. But all the actual hard work of it, I'm not going to... I don't have the power to touch it.
Well, that depends on what part of it, right? I mean, there's one side of it is reading academic, or the theories or even I guess not academic, just a popularized version. And the other part of it is just like going out and looking at stuff, right? Because that's the part of it that I get excited about, because just over the past several years, going out and looking at stuff, like I have observed things. I've observed that whenever I raise them with mycologists or people who are much more expert than I am. I'm like, so what's going on here? And sometimes there's an answer, and it's like, oh, this is what's going on. And sometimes is that hasn't really been studied. So your speculation sounds plausible, right? This is in particular my experience whenever I had been looking. I've been finding, not even looking for, but finding a lot of, there's a particular kind of fungus. It's that infects crane flies. This is the Orinia sepulchralis. And I wrote a short story sort of based on the behavior of what this fungus does to the crane flies, and applied it to people. And the story is called Guttation. It's Expat Press published it last year. And what I observed was, you could find a log with one of these sort of dead infected crane flies, where there's the fresh fungus, which just looked like white fuzz, just sort of bursting out from the seams of the crane fly. And if you sort of look further along on the log, there's another more far gone crane fly. And if you keep on as you sort of step back and pan out, you realize there are like just the remains, and some of them are maybe even from the year prior, of crane flies that were all compelled to this place, presumably by the fungus, right? Because it's not like, it doesn't grow fast enough that, like, okay, it would infect them from the log. And they're flies, right? That can move about. So there has to be something. It's like there's the summiting behavior where ants will, like a cordyceps fungus, right? It's sort of known, right, that it will compel the ants to sort of climb to a high place for the fungus to sprout out of it. So this seems like something similar happening in a different type of fungus, but that hasn't really been studied. But I saw it on sort of in two separate woods, just these clusters of flies that had been infected.
Yeah, that's fascinating. I love the idea of those types of fungus that take over bodies, because it just seems so ruthless on a level that a lot of other animal species, I guess there's some like bugs that will do that, right? That like bot flies put their larvae in other animals, and there's different bugs that do that to other bugs. And I don't know, like certain spiders die after their eggs hatch and then get eaten. But there's something really wild about like controlling another being's body as a means of your reproduction. And then I see articles about how we're using like dead spiders to we're like animating their limbs so we can walk them around, and I don't know what we would do with that information. But
Why do they? I mean, and parasitism is a theme that runs through a lot of my work, and it's true. I think whenever it's in the instances of whenever it's an animal parasitizing another animal, usually that animal has a stake in not killing its host, right? That is, it wants to exploit its host as best it can for its own purposes, and maybe it's like a bot fly, right? That can get pretty nasty, or but in so many cases, and this is again, I guess, kind of like the some of the the sort of commingled mutualism, right? That sort of works on the fungal level, right? There's some of that going on the host parasite level kind of situation too, right? That's some of that's a part of what I was getting at with in Leech Girl Lives, right, where sort of the leeches sort of devour and replace her arms, but they also are kind of like antidepressants and superpower.
Yeah.
Right. So.
Yeah. The longer I sit with that book, the more I like it. The more like little things that kind of, I don't know, didn't like fully hit me when I was reading it. And I think that the sort of weird relationship she had with the leech arms is something that I enjoy an awful lot. There was a lot to that book that I liked. I thought Safety Punk was just about the coolest thing. And I like just, the sort of logical conclusion of what does counterculture look like in a place like this, in a place like the Biodome. And the idea that it's just a whole bunch of people that walk around wearing like wrestling mat, gym mat helmets and things, was just hilarious, but like perfectly rational also.
Yeah, it's funny. Shortly after that came out, that was like when then the idea of the protagonist being an art safety inspector, right? That people would send me links about instances of unsafe art, right? Like there was I could remember there was some sort of there was a sculpture, I think it was in Cleveland, that like it was outside of a museum, and it was like it was curved. It was like a big metal curved thing, but it sort of reflected the sunlight.
Oh Jesus!
In such a way so that it like it basically burnt a spot of the grass near it, right? And there are other examples of that. I feel like there was like a oh geez, this I feel like it was kind of famous actually. There was like some artist making these. It was like these like stairs to nowhere, right? And I think people were ascending them and then throwing themselves from the stairs to nowhere. Like it was the idea that I think we're so familiar with the idea of like art being like, oh, it's not safe if it's like edgy in some particular way, right? Or if it's like pushing some sort of boundary of transgression. But like I just thought it would be very interesting. Like what if art being unsafe meant that it's actually going to physically harm you in some way, like a product that wasn't like properly tested or
because I mean there's other parallels I can think of, like Japanese danger music. There's that instance where the guy like drove a bulldozer into a venue during a concert, and people throwing broken glass into the crowd.
Oh geez,
and things like that.
Wait, I feel like I'm aware. Was that like an entourage or?
Yeah, I think that's what it's called. Hold on. so I get myself so that I don't need to answer any emails. Yeah, Hanatarash, meaning
Yeah,
sniveler or snot-nosed in Japanese.
yeah, they're so good. Hanatarash 4 is a really good album. Yeah,
I haven't actually listened to any of their music, so I'll have to.
it's like proto boredoms. So
Mm,
just imagine like it's like just the noisy parts of the boredoms. You're pretty
okay,
you're pretty close to that to what it would be.
interesting. Well, I guess one of the guys went on to
Yeah.
do boredoms. Okay, cool. Um, but beyond that, physically dangerous art is generally sort of like um laid at the feet of the artist, right?
Mm-hmm.
Is that Yoko Ono who did the the gun and the bullet on a table while she just sat there? I think Marina Abramovich did something similar.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Um, a friend told me once about a guy who like hung himself upside down from a bridge with like a knife in his hand so he could, and hung down there for a specific amount of time such that he like cut a mile through the river. But he like also had pricked his veins while doing that too, which is a thing that you're allowed to do. But yeah, I like the idea that there's like tripwires and pressure plates in the art. That is, you don't really touch on like haunted houses or anything, but
Mm.
I'm fascinated by the extreme haunted houses that were popular like 5 years ago in McCamey
Mm-hmm.
Manor and Blackout and things where people are allowed to grab you and you're signing giant waivers and whatnot. That again, it seems like a logical conclusion when people aren't thinking about what the art is saying and just trying to one up the art that's already there, which is a sort of criticism that I dance around a lot with transgressive writing, a lot, where I don't read a ton of it, but some of it, like on face value, it's like, okay, so you wrote that because that's the grossest thing you could think of, or that's the meanest thing you could think of to write, and that's fine. And I'm sure there's more to it, but there's certain writers where it's like, I feel like I could just get in trouble by having these books, and like maybe that's the point.
Right.
But yeah, Leech Girl Lives made me think an awful lot about transgressive art and what is it that we are actually transgressing, and in a world that is super duper sanitized and safe, what does transgression look like? It was a very got the wheels turning a lot in a way that a lot of fiction generally doesn't for me.
And it's what are you actually being kept safe from, right?
Right.
I mean,
Yeah.
I don't care, how much, how spoilery, it gets, because, it turns out, what people are being protected from necessarily, right, is not that like, oh, it's it's just not really the unsafe art or whatever, right? It's and who's really being protected by the sort of the efforts to seal away this turns out to be pretty privileged segment of the population away in a bubble. Or are they the ones who are being protected, or is it those who sealed them and are just kind of trying to escape responsibility for fucking up the planet?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, what a twist. The second part of that book, man, it was just like, I'm vibing in science fiction bubble city, and there's a mushroom wasteland. That's awesome. And then suddenly, boom, it's a different book that everything in the twist was, alluded to, and it slowly kind of starts to tell you what's actually happening. But the acceleration into the turn was really good. Something I've been trying to make a concerted, an intentional effort to interact more with is sort of schlocky science fiction paperbacks.
Yeah.
There's a couple used bookstores very close to where I live that have just a ton of them. I think a couple of science fiction nerds must have died, in the past 10, 20 years, and just nothing got grabbed up in the estate sales except for these like two guys who own these two bookstores next to each other. And so I'm just I have a ton of them at easy accessibility. And you start out Leech Girl Lives with a dedication and said that you were given a whole bunch of science fiction books by your uncle, was it?
That's right. Yeah. No, my uncle who when he sort of passed away, I wound up with loads of his stuff, and he had this massive collection of old, pulpy sci-fi novels, and some of it, I feel like, it was funny. I mean, it's when, I don't know, I had my attitude towards this kind of stuff, changed over time so much, because it was, I mean, the stuff I read growing up that I was like most excited about was sort of weird sci-fi stuff, right? I think of like, Madeline L'Engle, like Wrinkle in Time, and My Teacher Was an Alien, and and that it turned to and I loved the sort of Dougal Dixon speculative biology books, where it's like, here's like, the new dinosaurs, right? Like, what if dinosaurs had evolved till now? And you had those, or the sort of after man, where the idea of these sort of invented animals that would have evolved if people went extinct, and then at some point in, I don't know, shifting to like, I'm going to be an English major and I'm into serious literature, and I'm going to be reading things like Proust and Dostoevsky and et cetera, and kind of I don't know, look down on some of the like the genre-y stuff that I had once loved. And so, yeah, I got all these books, and I remember one of them was Day of the Triffids by John Wyndham, and that's mostly known as like, that's a hilarious, it's like the Killer Plant book, right? There's also the movie version, and that was what I was familiar with, and it's like Killer Plants. This is so B sci-fi ridiculous, until like I actually like finally you read it, and it was like, wait, this novel kicks ass. I'm going to read more of this stuff. I all that Jonathan Wyndham I could, and which led to sort of people writing sci-fi in the sort of 50s, 60s, 70s, and so that means like Ursula Le Guin and Murray Leinster, whose like stuff is, he wrote so many books, and I had to tell, I tell everyone I can about my favorite one by him, because there's always multiple copies of it in used bookstores like you're describing. It's called War with the Gizmos, and it's about killer invisible gaseous beings that invade, and you can only see if you like throw like a piece of cloth over them, and they can kind of see like their shape a little bit, right? But then they form kind of balls by joining into each other and becoming big masses of invisible things, and they kill you by suffocating you. and the way uh, the protagonists in the novel protect themselves by being killed by these invisible gaseous invaders is by smoking cigarettes, which I thought was just perfect.
I love that. I haven't ended up picking up books that old. It's been a lot of like 80s and 70s stuff, mostly because the cover art at that time period is really what hits me in the childhood. And yeah, there's just something to it, to just grab something that's like $1, and you'll read it in a couple days, if that, and finding that it's actually pretty interesting, and something it
and
just
such a sensory experience. You see the smell and the the different feel of it. Yeah,
100%. And I love the idea that they were just these science fiction guys. I think probably because the way that the economics worked is you just had to put out a bunch of books, to survive. I think maybe the way that publishing worked, I don't know if it was maybe like acting, where you sort of like could get a contract with a publishing company that was just like, yeah, we'll give you $50 for every book you can give us, and you're like, okay, well, here we go. And so you just end up getting like crazy ideas like that. Like, I mean, I love high concept stuff as much as the next guy, but I also love that whole, like, there was another meme that's like a couple years old at this point, where it's like, writer rolls dice. Okay, what if there was two guys who flips a card, are on the moon, and spins a giant wheel, are being attacked by pteranodons, and it's like, okay, well, that's the book, let's go. And
apparently, I mean, they're actually like plot device, like dice like that was, I think that might have been a thing that actually existed.
I was given for like a birthday one year, so I have stuff like that. There is and this is something about like serial TV writing that I love to think about, this idea that you are just sort of like handed a bunch of pieces, and it's like you have to figure out a way to make this make sense. And I think, a lot of people like to talk about how season 2 of Twin Peaks isn't very good, because David Lynch wasn't part of it. But I love the idea that like a couple of writers were given David Lynchy things and then tried to do David Lynch in a time where he hadn't been analyzed for decades yet. And so it's like, I don't know, what if the bad guy just like paper maches a guy in a giant chess piece? Let's just figure out how to make that work. I don't know. It reminds me of like old point and click adventure games, like the King Quest games, where just like, why is there a swamp? And then the next thing is I'm like in a beehive, and now there's Alice in Wonderland is here, and none of the aesthetics line up. Man, it feels so freeing to be like, you can just free associate 3 disparate ideas and make something cohesive if you try really hard.
Yeah. Although, see, I could never, or I would say never, but like I would really struggle to operate that like that. One thing that like just like in the way that I find myself writing is that I plot a lot.
Oh, interesting.
While at the same time, like, but I kind of plot improvisationally, or like what I do, I think a lot about plot, and I try to, there's the sort of, I don't know. I know is it a Kerouacian thing, like first idea, best idea? I don't know.
I'm not up with the beats. I don't know.
I have found that not to be true in my case anyway. And so I think first idea is probably something I heard somewhere else, somebody else's idea probably. And so, but I find that with the sort of taking my time with things and really sort of thinking about, okay, well, what's the next thing that could happen that, on the one hand, makes sense, but also, on the other hand, is surprising, right? Is that, because that's the experience that I want people to have when reading one of my books, is that the next thing that happens is like, it's like, what the fuck, but also, of course. And it's like, but also to feel like things could sort of veer off in a, I don't know, and in you don't know what direction, from the reader's point of view, right? So that it can, it has this sort of sense of momentum, and also feels like it, you don't, I mean, it's not like this is new, right? It's just like, you don't know what's going to happen next, but you want to know what happens next, right? But it's, I don't know, so what I had, like, for Leech Girl Lives, I wrote a lot of that book, like, while, like, on the road, like, literally, like, driving, during long commutes, and just turning over, like, narrative problems in my head, and trying to figure out, well, what's the way that we can, solve this problem, or create a problem that sort of is as weird as possible.
Yeah. And that book surprised me, because as far as these sort of indie lit books that I've been reading for 6 years now, the world just felt the most dense. There's a lot of books that are very vibes based, and thank God, because I love that.
Me too.
But this one, like, really felt like maybe there was a 60-page world building document on a computer somewhere that was being pulled from, which is something I really enjoy growing up reading, like, the Forgotten Realms books, right? This idea that, like, somebody somewhere has created a source book for the setting that you're going to be writing for. And because of that, there's just an awful lot that happens. And I think every once in a while people talk about how, like, books today are too long, or, like, mass market books are too long and don't justify their length. And Leech Girl Lives, like, just does. Like, there's so much in it that it makes sense that it's 300 and some pages long, with plot, like, I think it was just very successful at having things to read about, as opposed to a lot of the stuff that I read, which is just like, you're just kind of in a river, and it's pulling you through with beautiful language and interesting ideas that sort of, like, flit around. And it's just surprising when people break the mold, or when you find out that you've been kind of, like, insulating yourself into one stream for a while, and you're like, oh yeah, this dude follows a lot of the same people that I do, I'm sure his books are like that too, and then suddenly they're not. Which is just, I think for anybody listening who feels like maybe there's in this ecosystem a sort of, like, orthodoxy, it turns out that there might be, but there's different branches from it too.
Yeah, and I don't know, I guess, I mean, I try to, I don't know, I find myself, like, I don't know, I'm very impatient, and I don't know, I'm a pretty harsh editor, and I have, like, a, I don't know, sometimes I feel like I have the most fun reading short stuff. So, and I do find like, and I feel like I've heard people say like it's easier to sustain a particular sort of, you know, vibe or feeling, or, you know, with shorter work. And I don't know, I feel like with Tentacle Head, it kind of veers into something that's more, I don't know if it's like more aggressively grotesque or more just like, but well, I don't know. It's more aggressively grotesque and like sad and silly, and I don't know. People seem to. I'm glad people think it's funny, because like I'm not like a joke person, or like I'm not like a try to make people laugh kind of. That's just not. I'm in awe of people who can do that, but that's not really what I'm up to. Like deadpan is kind of how I roll, and but like I don't know, I was trying to go like deadpan and squishy. Does
Mm-hmm.
that make sense?
Yeah, I think like the sheer patheticness of Tentacle Head is where a lot of the humor comes from, where he's just being bullied by some kids and he's like, they're right, I should be dead. Like something that, you know, somebody who's very depressed might say in earnest, but it's kind of also hard to take seriously. You're just like, what are you talking about? And I think the cover art and internal art lends itself
Oh
to
my
that.
god,
Sarah did a wonderful job with the cover.
Sarah Allen Reed is just amazing, and just did I don't know what strange roll of the dice of the universe that got me. Well, I guess so. I mean, yeah. So she, came to this, through Bear Creek Press. You know, had been working with them, and I should say, so sort of the part of the the genesis for it, right? Is so I sent it to Stuart Buck, the the editor in chief of Bear Creek Press, and honestly just thinking of like, well, this is just kind of like a long story that might be good for the website, and he gets back to me and he's like, let's make it a children's book. I was just like, what are you talking about? But also like, okay, let's do it. And he had Sarah queued up, and yeah, her illustrations perfectly capture the sort of. So I mean, with that, I mean, I've been like comparing it to like, if like the Moominland stories and that kind of a thing, right? It's sort of like it's the bizarro, grotesque version of something like that. Yeah, she really captured the spirit of the art, and I don't know. I am not a. I don't know. I have like strong opinions about art and all that kinds of things, but I don't know. My inclination is like let the sort of. I don't know. I don't want to have to be like, if I don't in charge of the book cover kind of person. I don't know, and so seeing and like her art and for the cover and everything inside, it was just like, I don't know, it's something special.
It really is. It reminds me of various horror punk album covers.
Yeah.
Which sets the tone, I think, really good, because it is that same sort of tone, right? Where it's not taking itself super seriously, but it is covering themes and ideas that are serious and aren't fun or funny. But at the same time, I mean, like, Soylent Green is people is such a meme type of line, which is, you can figure out by reading the book why I brought that up, sort of thing. Yeah, I think it's a perfect book cover, which is hard. Book covers are hard to do.
Yeah.
And then the internal art is good too. There's a page that has the cast of characters and illustrations of all of them, and I'm just a big fan.
Yeah, no, I was amazed because whenever she showed me that for the first time, because that was I don't know, because these characters had been living in my head for for years at this point, right? And so it's like it's just sort of anxiety of, okay, what's somebody else gonna do with them? And she's, it's a cliche, but she knocked it out of the park, and yeah, I can be happier with how it turned out.
Absolutely. I'm very curious where some of these characters came from too, because they have names like Woody Spider Teeth, which is maybe my favorite character. Pale Sponge, Purple Gum, Green Grapes. What was the idea generation like for this?
That was very, maybe it's just sort of is very free associative, but I wanted the characters for the most part to be like they don't really have names so much as just very short descriptions of what they look like, but that are just odd juxtapositions. And I just I just wanted, originally in writing it, right, I didn't have the sharp, really drawn lines of like what the characters actually look like, so much as like, okay, these are kind of image juxtapositions that I just think would do interesting things in someone's head. That's something that I don't know. I've played around with in more like shorter stories, but not in something prior to this, and something as this length, right? I really like just when the description is like, on the one hand, it has an emotional resonance and maybe is surprising, but also and it can just kind of trigger the imagination in to kind of see things that are unexpected or in unexpected ways. I mean, I always go back to the sort of the story that made me excited about, like, thinking about this kind of thing. Like, it was like, eons ago, whenever I read The Nose by Nikolai Gogol, and the idea of like, there's this, they broke the bread and this nose comes out, and then the nose goes off and does like anthropomorphic things, and there's nothing about how like the nose is like changes size to be like, in disguise as a person or things like that. It's just like the nose gets onto a carriage, and it's like, it's just sort of that kind of absurdity that it's just it I don't know, it kind of reminds me of like the effect of like watching a horror movie and being scared of something that is plainly fake, right? Like, oh, like you can or scared or disgusted or having some kind of reaction, right? I'm thinking of like the old the pre-Lord of the Rings Peter Jackson movies, right? Like things like Dead Alive or Bad Taste, and those things that are like monsters and effects and things that they're fake, but they're still like they are elicit the response effectively because like they're of the way they're designed. Miko, who looks like a morel mushroom and oversees a number of mutant child things, and the moment when they discover Tentacle Head, who they think is dead and is not dead. Miko sits in the dust watching the children play. One with a head like a purple wad of chewed gum, and one that looks like a pile of overripe green grapes, take turns using a bone to scribble insults on the ground. One like a pale sponge with globs of red jelly for eyes, giggles and chases one like a ball of yellow fluff. Off to the side, one that appears to be made out of wood and has rows of twitching spider legs for teeth stands by itself, observing. Soon the children are bored. Green Grapes suggests they go play by the overflowing dumpsters. Playing by the overflowing dumpsters is fun because Miko tells them not to. When she catches them, her many eyes scowl as she scolds them and points accusingly at the turds and less identifiable categories of effluent curdling in oily pools among the trash. Purple Gum and Pale Sponge agree immediately. Overflowing dumpster playtime it is. But Yellow Fluff whines and hesitates. It doesn't want to get in trouble. It doesn't want to get dirty. It had only just managed to cut away the last clumps of mold that had started growing in its fluff. It's sure the mold came from playing in the trash. The others taunt Fluff by quacking at it. They say it is afraid because it is a duck. I am not a duck, Fluff insists, and goes along with the others to play near the trash to prove it. Woody Spiderteeth stands by itself, observing. They find a soiled old blanket covering some trash and they take it. What they find under the blanket isn't trash, it's a body. It's kind of all shriveled and kind of all bloated. They find the body very interesting. They get sticks and stand in a circle around the body, then take turns daring each other to poke it to prove it's dead. Before long, they're all laughing and whapping the body together, making a sick rhythm with their gleeful beating. They continue this game until Pale Sponge stops and yawns and says it's tired. The others agree they're also tired. They drag the body away from the trash. They take the blanket they found with the body and spread it on the ground. They prop up the body so it sits upright on the blanket. They have a pretend picnic with it. A child thing sits on each side of the body to take its arms and flop them around as they take turns doing deep voices to talk like grown-ups talk. The other children pretend to offer the body food. The children doing the imitation grown-up voices refuse the food politely, as if the body has some other reason besides being dead for not eating. No, thank you. I'm allergic to cake, the children make it say in their silly, deep mock grown-up voices. The children pretending to offer it food pretend to find the body's cake refusal so offensive they smear the pretend cake in its face. From where she sits, Miko can see them manipulating the corpse like a giant disfigured doll. She resists the urge to tell them not to. Over the next few days, she sees the children proceed from smearing imaginary things in the body's face to smearing a number of real things in its face. Mud, spit, maggoty fruit, possibly turds. She keeps resisting the urge to tell them not to. She tells herself she should let them be cruel. They are monsters among monsters. They live in a cage. They see death every day. Better they be cruel to someone dead than someone living. Better they be cruel to someone who feels nothing instead of each other. She doesn't blame them for their childish cruelty. They don't understand. Not because they're children. Children can understand anything. Because there's agony in understanding, in knowledge, in perception. For them, there's so much unavoidable agony they've already endured. Too much. The reason they're still alive is because the abuse they've suffered so far hasn't killed them yet. The procedures, the shanty town, the indifference of everyone around them, dying or killing one another to survive, especially the adults. Every adult except Miko.